the alternative for me is perfect practice makes perfect.
Right, okay. All right, we're getting facetious. All right.
Hey, Emma, what drum kit do you use?
Am I too old to start playing drums?
Should I get lessons?
How do I
Why
play
do drums
fast?
cost
When
so
will I
much?
start sounding good?
So today's podcast is the question: practice makes perfect, or does practice make perfect? Discuss.
I mean, the easy short answer is yes. To me. But that is coming from someone who, whoever's ever worked with me, stop listening right now. But especially when it comes to function gigs, usually I don't practice what we're playing anymore, unless there's something really complicated going on. I usually just have to write some notes and usually can blag the rest. But that might just be speaking for drums, because I class drums as the blagging instrument. There's going to be some purists out there going, absolutely not, no. But to me, like all of these questions, there's no actual flat out answer. Let's be real. Because especially at the beginning, practice, obviously, there's so much more room to improve than practice is the solution, quite simply. But I think once you get to a certain level, obviously practice will help a lot and it will smooth things out, but will you be able to get by without the practice? Probably.
Okay.
Depends on what level to which you want to perform is.
Interesting. So Emma's short hot take, does practice make perfect, is yes. I think this is going to be an interesting one because I agree with you what you're talking about once you're at a later level, but I think for me, the saying "practice makes perfect" is something that we've been fed as a young age, certainly in British culture,
yeah.
and I don't think it's true at all.
Interesting.
And it's flawed. And the alternative that people have said on Facebook and Instagram, and I put this out a couple of days ago, and it did spark a lot of debate, which was fun, is the alternative for me is perfect practice makes perfect.
Right. Okay. All right. We're getting facetious. All right.
But
yeah,
actually it's really important because when you're talking to you're teaching a lesson, for example, and somebody's practicing something wrong, what's the kind of thing that you do as a teacher? How do you normally handle that?
It's more harmful to be practicing something wrong.
So by default, immediately, practice doesn't make perfect. Like someone put, actually, I thought was quite a good response to this as well. This was on Facebook because you can comment easier on the kind of story posts. They put practice makes permanent. I thought that was quite a good one, and I've heard similar things before, but I was like, that's true. Practice does make permanent, and so if you practice something wrong, you basically are creating a bad habit, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked about habits on one of the previous ones that we did, and you can actually never really undo a habit. You can overwrite it, but it's always there, right? And so it becomes, when you're in a stressful environment, i.e. on stage, you start to default back to old habits, right? Good or bad. Like it's the habit doesn't have to be good, and that's obviously even up for debate in itself. So yeah, so for me, it was either someone from the NBA or NFL, a coach, a famous coach, and I really should know this, but he said perfect practice makes perfect, and even that, to me, there isn't a thing as perfection, but I think it's interesting because the practice wrong is inputting incorrect stuff. So now, having said that, when somebody's trying to learn how to improvise and put fills around the drum kit and play with bands, there's a level there of actually like having to make mistakes, right? Like trying to speak a new language.
Yeah.
So there's a balance to that. But yeah, so when your students are practicing, Emma, and you're observing that, and they're doing something wrong, how do you go about handling that?
It depends on the student, I think.
Yeah.
And it depends what their goal is. Because, you've got some adult students who are just like usually more impatient than the kids. And sometimes it's just a case of, okay, do you want to just be playing drums for fun? In which case, okay, I might let some of this stuff slide. I'll mention it and I'll be real about it. But if your goal isn't to be playing with other people or to be out there doing blast beats, and you just want to get the song down, then okay, I might have a bit more leeway. But if it's kids especially, I try my best to kind of correct that technique, because it was so valuable to me when I was a kid. I didn't know it obviously at the time, but when I first started drums, I had a teacher for about a year called Julian, and he was amazing. But he really emphasized, I don't remember a lot of it, but my mum was in the lesson, so she told me that he focused a lot on technique and rudiments and getting stuff to sound even and good. And I think that first year was incredibly crucial, but it wasn't right for me in the long run because of other things. So like, he was very much about sight reading correctly and counting correctly, which I just didn't get until I got a new teacher and had him for years, where he was just using phonetics and stuff like that. So like using words instead of the count. That changed the game for me. So there's benefits to going the correct, traditional, very technical, correct route. But then there are benefits, huge benefits, to also doing it in just the way that works. So there is a balance to find between those two. But especially if it's like you're really setting these first initial habits, trying to catch those and get those to be as good as possible is always the goal, really.
Yeah, it's trying to do that if it's a young student, and actually even an adult, it's the same, because they get like disheartened by having to just continuously do drills, basically, right? But it's that balance. You probably had the same, but I've taken on quite a lot of students that, let's say, started from a fairly young age, but then they've come, I don't know, like for example, they've moved in England. We have primary school, you finish at 11, then you move to secondary school, basically high school in America. At like 11, 12, and then that teacher was in their primary school, so they're now no longer going to be having. So then you acquire that student, and just like the first year you had that other teacher that sets the right techniques, that set you instead. When you've then taken on a student that hasn't been taught the right things, or it might, that's not necessarily about being taught the right things, hasn't developed in a way,
been on that aspect of stuff.
The problem is that they then, it's hard work. It's really hard work to try and undo that, or to like I said, paste over a new kind of technique. And so that becomes something that is then even more tiring. So it's that balance, isn't it, as a teacher, to be like, right, well, I want to keep you infused and being able to play stuff, but also not developing too many bad habits. So but yeah, it's getting the right practice. So this goes for any drummer, how do they make sure that they're practicing the right thing? And let's just say they don't have anybody that's teaching them. So they're not that they are self-taught, just at this moment in time they are practicing, and they don't have somebody there. And actually, let's be honest, even if you have a lesson once a week, 90% is not done with somebody observing you. So what can they do to make sure that their practice is perfect?
I'd think about it is, if there is a pinch point in your progress, if you there's a speed you can't get past, or like, especially if you're slightly earlier on and you can hear people are getting this speed like easily, like it will be that the answer is technical. And so with that knowledge, you've got to ask yourself, what am I actually doing here that's not correct or not working for this? And don't try and force that technique to work that you're already doing. For example, doubles. Everybody will, if they're trying to get speed, forget about technique and have it all come from the wrist, for example, and they'll tense up and do all that stuff. Observe what you're doing, see what's going on. It can be quite difficult, especially when you don't know what the solution is. So it gets frustrating and you just don't you go, well, I can do this and I'm going to stick with this. But I mean, now with stuff online, there's so much resource for that. If you can kind of pinpoint the specific issue you're having, it helps a lot to then find the solution. So just observing what's going on, maybe asking yourself, like, where are you feeling tension when you're playing? what, for example, are you engaging your fingers or not? If you're not, you're going to have some issues. That's the way I'd kind of approach it, but that is also coming from the perspective of someone who knows what they're looking for.
Right.
So that's quite hard to
Yeah.
do on your own, which is why, like even having one lesson with somebody who knows what they're talking about, who can look at your hands, is hugely beneficial.
What tool could somebody use to help increase their self-awareness?
Depends on what they're doing, but like you could have, honestly, you can even I remember my tutor at uni was like, just play with a mirror in front of you.
Yeah.
Especially when you're doing doubles or you're trying to fix your left hand, because like you'll just see how wonky it looks and you can start to fix it from there. Obviously you've got like if it's specifically left hand stuff, I've got the Equaliser, which is free ebook, and also the new drums toolkit. Kind of goes without saying.
Yeah,
both of them are free, and it kind of goes into all of that stuff and trying to start to be self-aware.
Yeah, and the Equaliser, if people don't know, is a book that Emma's done, a free ebook where it's all predominantly focusing on your left hand, making up the most of the grooves, so to speak. It's really an exercise, but it's your left hand's doing a lot more work than your right hand, basically, and it does that. It's probably a little bit advanced for quite a lot of people. So you did Left Hand Bootcamp, which isn't a free course that you do, but it's a full online program where you break it down for 3 different difficulty levels, which has been very beneficial for people. And by nature, the course is designed to get you to be more self-aware throughout it as well. So that's something it does in the course. And it's one of the things I was trying to pull from Emma there, which she hasn't talked about yet. I've been leaving little clues.
It's the one thing I kind of forget to mention because I just don't like so much other stuff going on.
No, but there's something particular in that course that we designed to be able to develop self-awareness that you haven't mentioned yet. So there's a mirror, but let's say you practice at a local studio and it's not possible to bring a mirror down to the studio. What else could you use? What do generally most people nowadays have at their disposal?
Oh God, you just film yourself. Yeah.
That's it, and so part of the course is filming yourself and then actually uploading it to the peers, and your peers can talk back with you and make comments on it as well, right? And they could also be telling you the wrong thing for sure, but it's about building that self-awareness, right? So and you can get maybe 7 different opinions and might make you feel more confused, but actually you've got to look at what people were saying maybe there and then what you think, and then going, interestingly, actually, that's definitely what's happening there. Let's try something different. When you then try something different, 90% of the time, depending on what it is, it probably won't feel easier to start with. So you have to give it some time and an actual, like, a bit of persistence to test the waters.
Especially if you've been doing that said thing for a really long time and it's cemented in your muscle memory.
Right. I think there was one guy in the course, and I want to say his name was Dan, and apologies if I got this wrong, but he put in there on the Left Hand Bootcamp that it'd been like, again, the time frame slips my mind, 5 to 10 years doing something in a certain way, and that one exercise, the immediate thing that he opened out, and you're like, do this and engage your fingers and do it like this, and he was like, what the hell? I've just gained like 30% speed in 20 seconds of opening the course. So, and that's
happens in lessons sometimes, and it blows people's minds. You get 2 types of people when they're like doing doubles and singles. Either the people who really just struggle with it, and then there's the people who go, oh, right, okay, and then it's just straight out.
And then to get to the next stages, so coming back to the original question of practice makes perfect, if you're making your practice more perfect, so to speak, then all of a sudden then it's about putting the reps in, right? And I think the easiest way to get this across to people, for me, the way that I teach this is like, if you're bench pressing and you're doing the wrong technique, well, straight away the first thing people think, you're going to injure yourself. That happens with musical instruments over time, so that's something you've got to be aware of, right? If you're tensing, that's probably going to lead to injury at some point. The other thing is, it's like, when you go to bench, it's quite obvious if you're doing a wrong technique, you're not gonna be able to lift it right. It's a much more clear and obvious thing that and it might drop down at you, and there's a lot of consequences. So that's why you have people to spot you, and you do that. Again, it's like, I don't know, take throwing a ball. If you keep throwing the ball with a wrong technique, it doesn't matter how many times you practice that, you're not going to get it to go any further. Kicking a ball with football, it's not going to go any better if you keep doing it wrong. So it's exactly the same with drums. The result is just not as instant. If you kick a ball and it goes 10 meters, you can see how far it's gone. Or just if you're trying to aim it in like a tire and trying to get it straight through, if you're playing soccer and you're in a goal post and you've got that, if you're hitting it 9 times out of 10, it's a clear and obvious, like, okay, I'm getting good at this. The drums is way more vague, isn't it? You don't like, it's so hard to measure your progress on that front. So this is when the metronome comes in, not just to help your timing, but also have something to gauge against. So
yes,
how do people know what speed they need to start with the metronome?
there's 2 answers, I think. So the first is slow enough that you aren't reverting back to the original technique. And if you want to fine tune stuff, have it on a higher subdivision. So most of the time metronomes are on a quarter note, so the pulse, the number 1, 2, 3, 4. If you want to get more accurate, you can set that to 1 and 2 and 3, or like I really like to use 16th note metronomes when you're doing something more technical, because it really pushes you in. This is, I guess, more so for locking in grooves and multiple limbs on different things, but it still applies. Like, it just really keeps you in line more forcibly. And then you can kind of take away the click and you can do the opposite end, which is where you have like maybe 1 click per 2 bars and maybe leave it even longer than that.
And that one there though is developing more your inner clock, whereas the one that is the subdivision of say 16ths is more focusing on your actual your like note placement and the evenness of your note placement, right? And how consistent that is. If you're flamming against the metronome, then you're obviously the timekeeping isn't there. But not timekeeping, the actual technique isn't there yet and accurately getting the evenness between the strokes. I use the analogy of like that, what you said there with the pulse, adding the pulse is like putting the stabilizers on your bike. Yeah,
basically.
It's going to help you, and like it's going to do that. So,
but you also want to get the technique right before you even bother with the metronome. Like it's more important that you're relaxed with the technique before you start to try and fine tune it, because again, you will just revert back to what you were doing
true.
before.
Yeah, if you're just trying to get it in time and you're struggling to get it in time, then you're going to go back to that old technique because the focus is on the time, not the thing. How does somebody when they're practicing without the metronome in that point, how do they know if they're doing it slow?
Again, you don't revert back to the original technique. I think metronome is good because it holds you at a certain speed, because it's very easy to be like, oh, I get it now. Oh, wait, I've messed it up. And then you get frustrated because you can't get it right. Whereas with the metronome, it kind of helps. It gives you something to kind of settle into. I find that you get to that like meditative kind of state a lot easier with that. It means you can actually sit and focus on the thing you're supposed to sit and focus on.
Yeah.
So I prefer that. What was the question?
With the how do you like? Because obviously you mentioned that starting with a metronome isn't always great because you just need to get the technique, and just trying to play in time might pull your focus away from developing that. Just trying to actually play it physically in time.
It's more important that technique is relaxed because you'll get nothing out of something that isn't relaxed. Honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And then at some point though, there's often like a period of transition, right? So that then the technique maybe have to adapt to the speed at which you're playing.
There's a crossover, usually a BPM. There's a certain BPM you'll find. It's like it doesn't quite work to be a slower feel kind of for that technique, and there is a crossover point where you have to almost relax and also put more power into it at the same time. It's kind of a funny balance to find, but as long as the relaxation and the technique, more importantly, is solid, so again you don't revert back to what you were doing before, and your tempo increase is smooth enough, because a lot of people will just go, jump in 10s of 20s of BPMs.
Yeah.
And that you don't do that.
What intervals do you tend to recommend to?
5s.
I know it's interesting. 5. I
5s.
actually like to go as low as 2.
Really?
Because I find that even 5s can be a big jump
Sometimes
at
it depends.
times.
Yeah, it depends.
It does depend, and this is again where the self-awareness comes back in, and knowing how much you can jump, right? But 2s are really good. There are a bunch of metronomes as well where you can set it to be at a BPM for like 16 bars, and then it will increase up to every 16 bars.
Yeah.
The one I'm thinking of that I know of is called Dr. Patotti. I think it's only available on the App Store. So Apple, Google users, unfortunately, you will have to transition to Apple. But I'll put the link in on that one. But it does what Emma was talking about with the subdivisions, all of that. It is a little bit daunting when you first open it. I have to say, it's a lot of stuff going on there. And so just, be aware of that and be patient. But there is a free version that has some ads on it when you stop the metronome every time. Kind of annoying, but you could at least see, is this right for me? And then the paid for version that they have. So that's a good one for that. But yeah, it does like a coach basically, and it keeps increasing the tempo. Cool. And that one of the problems is when you're doing it yourself, you even just get blinded, like, oh, I'm now at the fastest tempo I've ever been. And mentally you start to think differently as well, right? If it's just doing it in the background every X bars, you don't think as much about it until you get to the point where you can't, and you look over and you realise that.
And you don't have to stop the flow of stuff to change them.
Exactly. You don't have to stop the flow, which is really important. So that's one that's really good there. I think that's a lot. So there's so much more we could talk about on this topic, obviously. You could go on for hours about it. But for me, the short answer is no, practice doesn't make perfect. I think Emma would have the same opinion when when you actually look, when you define it, and there's that. But it's so important, and it's really important to try and get it right from the offset. And I think that's the kind of short answer to this. Obviously, we talked about a few ways to try and get better at practice. And I think for me, the biggest thing that you can use if you don't have, even if you do have a teacher, it doesn't matter. When you're practicing alone, is use your phone and film yourself. That is one of the biggest things. It's better to do 5 minutes of practice and 5 minutes of watching yourself back. You don't even need to watch 5 minutes. You can watch like 30 seconds. You'll soon see if there's something wrong, right? Yeah. Than do 10 minutes of practice and not. That's it. Because it's not the quantity of the practice, it's the quality of it. And then the quality times the quantity. But if you don't have the quality in the first place, then it's not going to work. So, anything else on that particular subject?
Not that I can currently think of, no. But if there's more questions, I'm sure people will.
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions on this one. And I know we haven't given a complete answer to it. And unfortunately, it is just something that you have to develop over years. Yeah, and there's a lot of things that you can do to get better. But I think the best thing, film yourself, watch it back. As cringe as that is, that's going to give you the most accurate picture of what's actually going on.
It will get less cringe.
Yes, it will. Yeah, over time.
Yeah.
Cool. All right then. Fantastic. We'll see you for the next one.
Yeah.
Did we answer the question, does practice make perfect? Is it ambiguous and therefore a good talking point? Maybe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you want some next slightly less ambiguous steps as to what you should do and what you should be prioritising as a drummer, feel free to check out this other podcast. Or if you've been wondering whether you should have lessons, whether you need them, whether they'll benefit you, feel free to check out this video. That is all. Have a great day. Mwah!